When successful attorney Derek Monroe stood in divorce court, degrading his black wife Gabrielle as trailer trash who married up, the judge looked bored. But when the estate lawyer interrupted with documents about Gabrielle's late father, Derek's smirk vanished. What happened next made him lose everything he thought he'd won. The fluorescent lights of courtroom 7B hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow across the polished wood and worn leather seats. Gabrielle Thompson Monroe sat with her hands folded in her lap, her posture perfect despite the weight pressing down on her shoulders. At 34, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that no amount of courtroom hostility could break. Her navy blue dress was simple, professional, purchased from a department store clearance rack because she'd learned long ago that expensive clothes didn't make you worthy, character did. Across the aisle, her soon-to-be ex-husband Derek radiated smug confidence, his designer suit probably costing more than Gabrielle spent on groceries in 6 months. Derek Monroe had always been handsome in that polished investment banker way, sharp jawline, perfectly styled hair with just enough gray at the temples to suggest wisdom he didn't actually possess. At 42, he'd built a reputation as a ruthless deal-maker, someone who knew exactly how to assess value and exploit weakness. Today, he was doing both. His girlfriend Vanessa, a socialite with impossibly white teeth and a collection of Birkin bags, sat in the gallery behind him, her presence a calculated insult. She examined her manicure with practiced boredom, occasionally glancing at Gabrielle with thinly veiled contempt. The proceedings had been brutal. Derek's attorney, a shark-like woman named Patricia Chen, who charged $800 an hour, had spent the morning systematically dismantling Gabrielle's contributions to their 8-year marriage. According to Patricia's narrative, Gabrielle was a gold digger who'd latched onto Derek's success while contributing nothing of value. She worked as a school counselor, making barely $45,000 a year. She had no family money, no connections, no assets of her own. She was, in Patricia's carefully chosen words, a woman who saw an opportunity and took it. Then Derek took the stand, and the humiliation truly began. He adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and began painting a picture of their marriage that bore no resemblance to reality. "Your Honor, I met Gabrielle at a charity event. She seemed sweet, humble. I thought I was helping someone who'd had a difficult life." His voice dripped with condescension, each word precisely chosen to wound. She grew up in a rundown neighborhood on the South Side. Her father was a mechanic who died leaving her nothing but debt. I paid off her student loans. I gave her a home, a lifestyle she could never have imagined. And how did she repay me? By being cold, distant, ungrateful. Gabrielle's attorney, a overworked public defender named Mr. Harrison, who'd taken her case pro bono, objected weakly a few times, but the judge, a middle-aged man who seemed more interested in his upcoming tea time than justice, overruled him repeatedly. Derek continued his testimony, growing bolder with each passing minute. "She contributed nothing to our household income, nothing to our social standing. I brought her into circles where she didn't belong, and she embarrassed me repeatedly with her simplicity." The courtroom felt smaller with each word. Gabrielle kept her eyes forward, refusing to give Derek the satisfaction of seeing her break. But inside, memories flickered like old film reels. She remembered their early years when Derek had seemed kind. She remembered believing his words when he said her work with troubled teenagers mattered, that her volunteer hours at homeless shelters were admirable. She remembered the exact moment things changed. About 2 years ago, when Derek's firm landed a major client and suddenly their home became a showroom for his ambition. She wasn't a partner anymore. She was a prop that didn't fit the aesthetic. "Her father was nobody," Derek continued, his voice rising slightly. "Lawrence Thompson, a man who died 5 years ago in a rented apartment, leaving my wife absolutely nothing. No inheritance, no family support, no safety net. She has no prospects without me, Your Honor. I'm asking the court to recognize that I built everything we have and she deserves only what the law minimally requires." Behind Derek, Vanessa stifled a laugh poorly, whispering something to her friend. The words carried just far enough for Gabrielle to hear, "Finally getting rid of the charity case." The cruelty was intentional, performative. Derek glanced back with a slight smile, enjoying the theater of it all. Mr. Harrison tried to cross-examine, asking Derek about Gabrielle's contributions to their home, her emotional support during his difficult cases, her sacrifice of career advancement to be available for his social obligations. But Derek deflected everything with practiced ease. "I paid for housekeepers, Your Honor. I didn't need her to clean. As for emotional support, I have colleagues, friends, a therapist. Marriage shouldn't be about one person's neediness." The judge seemed inclined to agree. He'd barely looked at Gabrielle throughout the proceedings, his demeanor suggesting this was just another routine divorce where a successful man was divesting himself of an inconvenient spouse. Derek's final statement cemented his victory, or so he thought. "Your Honor, I want to be clear. I don't hate Gabrielle. I pity her. I want her to understand what she's lost by not appreciating what I provided. She'll leave this marriage with exactly what she brought to it. Nothing, and perhaps that will teach her gratitude." The courtroom fell silent except for the scratch of the court reporter's fingers on her stenotype machine. Gabrielle felt tears sliding down her cheeks, though she hadn't consciously decided to cry. They just came, silent and unstoppable, tracking mascara down her brown skin. She thought about her father, Lawrence, who'd raised her alone after her mother died when Gabrielle was 7. He'd worked constantly, always in grease-stained clothes, driving that terrible old pickup truck that broke down more often than it ran. He'd taught her that kindness mattered more than wealth, that education was freedom, that dignity couldn't be purchased. He'd died 5 years ago from a sudden heart attack, and Gabrielle had buried him in the modest plot she could barely afford, wearing the only suit he owned. Derek was right about one thing. Her father had left her no money. The apartment had been rented, his possessions few. But he'd left her something Derek would never understand, an unshakable sense of self-worth that existed independent of anyone else's validation. The judge was about to bang his gavel, clearly ready to rule in Derek's favor, when the courtroom doors burst open with a force that made several people jump. A man entered, elderly but commanding, wearing an immaculate three-piece suit that whispered old money. He carried a leather briefcase that looked older than most of the people in the room, weathered but expensive. His silver hair was precisely trimmed, his dark skin deeply lined with age, his eyes sharp and purposeful. "Your Honor," the man said, his voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to being heard, "I apologize for the dramatic interruption. My name is Bernard Crawford, senior partner at Crawford Mills & Associates. I represent the estate of Lawrence Benjamin Thompson." Gabrielle's head snapped up. That was her father's full name, Lawrence Benjamin Thompson. But why would an attorney from one of the city's most prestigious estate law firms be representing him? Her father had been a mechanic. He'd died with nothing. Derek looked annoyed rather than concerned. "Your Honor, what could this possibly have to do with our divorce proceedings? This is clearly a stalling tactic." The judge, however, looked intrigued for the first time all day. Bernard Crawford's firm didn't handle small estates. They represented old money, generational wealth, the kind of families who had buildings named after them. "Mr. Crawford, please approach. This is highly unusual." Bernard moved forward with measured steps, opening his briefcase to remove several thick folders. "Your Honor, I have documents directly pertinent to these proceedings. They concern assets, inheritance, and matters of financial standing that have been grossly misrepresented today. I respectfully request a brief recess to present these materials to all parties involved." The judge agreed, his curiosity now fully engaged. Gabrielle felt her heart pounding as Bernard approached her table. Up close, she could see kindness in his eyes, mixed with something that looked like satisfaction. "Ms. Thompson," he said quietly, using her maiden name, "your father wanted me to wait for precisely this moment. He was a very wise man." The recess felt endless. Bernard spread documents across the defense table while Mr. Harrison looked increasingly confused and hopeful. Derek paced outside the courtroom, his confidence beginning to show hairline cracks. Vanessa checked her phone obsessively, her earlier smugness fading. When court reconvened, Bernard stood with the commanding presence of someone about to deliver a verdict of his own. Your Honor, members of the court, I need to correct several significant misstatements made during today's proceedings. Lawrence Benjamin Thompson was not, as Mr. Monroe testified, nobody. He was, in fact, the founder and primary shareholder of Thompson Global Industries, a multinational technology conglomerate specializing in industrial automation and software systems. The courtroom erupted. The judge demanded silence. Derek's face went pale. Gabrielle felt the room spinning. Bernard continued, his voice steady. Mr. Thompson built his company over 40 years, from a single repair shop to an empire holding patents worth billions. At the time of his death 5 years ago, his personal net worth exceeded $4.7 billion. That's impossible, Derek blurted out, half rising from his seat. She lived in a tiny apartment. Her father drove a broken-down truck. I investigated her background before we married. There was nothing. That, Bernard said with a slight smile, was entirely intentional. Mr. Thompson believed that true character couldn't develop in the shadow of wealth. He lived modestly, worked with his hands, and raised his daughter to value integrity over material possessions. He wanted Gabrielle to become who she truly was, not who money might make her. Bernard opened another folder, this one containing photographs. He held them up, images of a younger Lawrence Thompson in corporate boardrooms, shaking hands with CEOs and politicians, accepting industry awards. Then candid photos of the same man in work clothes, teaching a young Gabrielle how to change oil, helping her with homework at a kitchen table, attending her college graduation with tears in his eyes. Mr. Thompson established a complex trust before his death, Bernard explained. He left explicit instructions. Gabrielle would inherit his entire estate, but only under specific conditions. She had to demonstrate for a minimum of 5 years after his passing that she possessed the character he'd worked so hard to instill. She had to show kindness without expectation of reward, humility without degradation, strength without cruelty. Gabrielle's hands trembled as she processed this information. Her father, her quiet, humble father who'd worn the same 3 shirts in rotation and clipped coupons religiously, had been a billionaire, and he'd spent 5 years after his death testing her. Independent trustees, Bernard continued, monitored Ms. Thompson without her knowledge. They documented her volunteer work at homeless shelters, spending her weekends serving meals and organizing donation drives. They observed her mentoring at-risk teenagers through her school counseling position, often staying hours past her paid time to ensure struggling students had support. They noted her donations to charity, small amounts given her perceived income but consistently given despite her own modest means. They witnessed her kindness to strangers, her integrity in difficult situations, her refusal to compromise her values even when doing so might have been easier. The judge leaned forward, completely engaged now. Derek looked like he might be sick. The trust documents, Bernard said, producing yet another folder, contained one additional clause. Mr. Thompson specified that his daughter would inherit only after facing what he termed a trial of character, a situation where someone would test her fundamental integrity, where she would be tempted to abandon her principles or demonstrate their depth. Bernard turned to look at Derek with undisguised contempt. Mr. Monroe, your cruelty today has inadvertently fulfilled that requirement. You attempted to humiliate Ms. Thompson, to make her feel worthless, to convince this court that she contributed nothing of value. In doing so, you created the exact scenario her father anticipated, a moment where her true character would be revealed under pressure. He opened another file, this one thicker than the others. I should also mention that Mr. Thompson, being a thorough man, had you investigated before Ms. Thompson accepted your marriage proposal. He discovered several interesting facts. You have a pattern, Mr. Monroe. Before Gabrielle, you pursued and subsequently abandoned 2 other women from wealthy families once you realized their inheritances weren't as accessible as you'd hoped. You have offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands containing marital assets you've been secretly transferring for the past 18 months. You have emails to Vanessa dating back 2 years, planning this divorce down to the timeline. Patricia, Derek's attorney, stood up. Your Honor, I was not informed of any of this. Because your client lied to you, Bernard said calmly, as he lied to his wife, the court, and apparently himself about his own motivations. The judge's expression had transformed from bored to furious. Mr. Monroe, is this true? Have you been fraudulently transferring marital assets? Derek's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Vanessa, sensing disaster, quietly gathered her purse and slipped toward the exit. Bernard wasn't finished. There's more, Your Honor. The mansion Mr. Monroe claims to have provided, purchased with funds from periodic disbursements from Ms. Thompson's trust, amounts released for her welfare without her knowledge of their true source. The trustees ensured she had a comfortable home, health insurance, and financial stability, all while she believed she was living solely on her counseling salary and her husband's generosity. He produced bank statements, highlighted and annotated. 78% of what Mr. Monroe considers marital assets can be traced directly to Ms. Thompson's trust fund. Additionally, we have evidence of forged signatures on multiple financial documents. Mr. Monroe has been committing fraud, Your Honor, believing his wife had no resources to fight back. The courtroom fell silent except for Derek's shallow breathing. Everything he'd built his case on was crumbling. Every word he'd spoken in testimony was now revealed as self-serving fiction. Ms. Thompson, Bernard said, turning to Gabrielle with genuine warmth, your father wanted you to hear this in your moment of greatest doubt. He wanted you to know that he saw you, loved you, and never stopped protecting you, even from beyond the grave. You passed every test. You remained kind when the world was cruel. You stayed humble when pride might have been easier. You chose love over wisdom, perhaps, but you never compromised who you were. He reached into his briefcase one final time and withdrew a sealed envelope, yellowed slightly with age. Your father wrote this 5 years ago, to be delivered at this exact moment. He predicted somehow that you would face betrayal. He wanted you to have his words when you needed them most. Gabrielle took the envelope with shaking hands. Her name was written across the front in her father's familiar, careful handwriting. She opened it slowly, aware that everyone in the courtroom was watching, not caring about their audience anymore. The letter inside was 2 pages, handwritten, and reading it felt like hearing her father's voice again after years of silence. My precious girl, it began, and Gabrielle's voice broke as she read aloud, tears streaming freely now. If you're reading this, you've faced someone who tried to diminish you. I'm sorry I can't be there to stand beside you, but know that I'm so proud of who you've become. You are descended from survivors, builders, dreamers. Your grandmother picked cotton in Mississippi and lived to see her granddaughter graduate from college. Your great-grandfather built homes with his hands during the Depression, never taking payment he hadn't earned. You come from people who understood that dignity isn't granted, it's claimed quietly every single day. The courtroom was absolutely still. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, listening. Gabrielle continued, her voice steadier now. I built a company, yes. I made money that I hope you'll use wisely, but my greatest creation was you. Your kindness, your integrity, your unshakable belief that every person deserves respect. That couldn't be bought or inherited. That came from you, from who you chose to be when no one was watching. Your worth was never in my money, baby girl, but now you have resources to change the world. Use them to lift others the way I tried to lift you. Make me proud, though you already have, every single day of your life. Love, Dad. By the time Gabrielle finished reading, she wasn't the only one crying. Mr. Harrison was wiping his eyes. One of the clerks had tissues pressed to her face. Even the judge looked moved. His earlier impatience completely evaporated. Bernard let the moment settle before speaking again. Your Honor, I move that these proceedings be immediately halted and all of Mr. Monroe's requests be denied. Furthermore, given the evidence of fraud, forgery, and perjury, I recommend criminal referral to the appropriate authorities. The judge didn't hesitate. Motion granted. Mr. Monroe, you disgust me. Everything you requested is denied. The marital home, the assets, the accounts, all subject to full forensic audit to determine what rightfully belongs to Ms. Thompson. I'm also holding you in contempt and referring this case to the district attorney for criminal investigation. Bailiff Mr. Monroe is not to leave the jurisdiction. Derek finally found his voice. Gabrielle, please, I made a mistake. We can work this out. I still love you. No, Gabrielle said quietly, the single word carrying more power than all of Derek's testimony combined. You said I should understand what I lost. Now you will. She stood, gathering her dignity around her like armor. Bernard offered his arm, and together they walked out of the courtroom, leaving Derek sitting alone at the defendant's table, his perfect life in ruins. 6 months later, Gabrielle sat in her father's former office, now her office, at Thompson Global Industries headquarters. The view overlooked the city, glass and steel stretching toward the horizon. She'd transformed the space, adding plants and photographs, making it feel less like a corporate monument and more like a place where real work happened. The work of changing lives. The Lawrence Thompson Foundation had launched 3 months earlier, funded with $2 billion from her inheritance. They provided full scholarships to underprivileged youth, funded programs for domestic abuse survivors, and supported community initiatives in neighborhoods like the one where she'd grown up. Gabrielle still worked as a school counselor 2 days a week. She'd refused to give that up, but now she could do so much more. News coverage had been intense. Billionaire CEO Gabrielle Thompson revolutionizes corporate philanthropy, read one headline. From school counselor to CEO, the secret heiress changing the game, proclaimed another. But Gabrielle barely read them. She was too busy working. Derek had been charged with fraud and forgery. His assets were frozen, his career destroyed, his reputation ruined. Vanessa had vanished the day the news broke, already pursuing her next wealthy target. Derek's lawyer had tried to negotiate some kind of settlement, but Gabrielle's response, delivered through Bernard, was simple. He wanted me to have nothing. Now he understands how that feels. On a Saturday morning, Gabrielle drove her modest sedan. She'd refused the fleet of luxury cars that came with her inheritance to the cemetery where her father was buried. She'd replaced the simple headstone with something more fitting, a beautiful granite monument engraved with Lawrence Benjamin Thompson. He built an empire but raised a queen. She sat on the grass beside it, talking to him the way she had when he was alive. I understand now, Dad. Why you lived the way you did. Why you wanted me to find Derek on my own, even knowing what he was. You knew I needed to learn that my value didn't come from anyone else's opinion, that I could stand in a courtroom and be called worthless and still know deep in my bones that I was enough. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment Gabrielle could almost hear her father's laugh. Later that afternoon, she met with a group of teenagers from her mentorship program. They gathered in a community center in her old neighborhood, 15 kids ages 14 to 17, all brilliant and struggling in ways that wealth couldn't immediately fix. Gabrielle had been working with them for months, teaching them coding, helping them see futures beyond their current circumstances. A young girl named Destiny, sharp-eyed and skeptical, looked up from her laptop. Miss Gabrielle, is it true you're really a billionaire? My mom saw you on the news. Gabrielle smiled, the same warm expression her father used to give her when she asked difficult questions. I have a lot of money, yes, but that's not what I am. I'm someone who believes in you. I'm someone who knows that where you start doesn't determine where you finish. I'm someone who doesn't let money define her, just like my father taught me. But you could buy anything, another student said. Why are you here teaching us for free? Because, Gabrielle said, thinking of her father in his grease-stained work shirts, of courtroom humiliation, of tests she didn't know she was taking. True wealth isn't what you have. It's what you give. It's who you are when no one's watching. It's whether you use your resources to build walls or bridges. She looked around at their faces, seeing herself reflected in their dreams and doubts. My father gave me money, yes, but his real gift was teaching me that dignity can't be purchased, that kindness costs nothing, and that the person who tries to make you feel small is usually revealing their own emptiness, not yours. As the afternoon wore on and Gabrielle worked alongside her students, helping them debug code and debug their doubts, she felt a peace she'd never experienced in her marriage. Derek had tried to humiliate her into worthlessness. Instead, he'd given her the final test she needed to pass before stepping into her true inheritance, not just money, but purpose. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is actually the most powerful. Sometimes the person being mocked is secretly a queen. And sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming so completely yourself that the opinions of small people simply don't matter anymore. Gabrielle Thompson had learned what her father always knew. True inheritance isn't just money. It's values, dignity, and unshakable self-worth. Character tested in darkness shines brightest when brought to light. And the people who mock your humble beginnings often fear your extraordinary future because they know, deep down, that they could never survive the tests you've already passed. Derek tried to humiliate Gabrielle because he thought she was powerless. He never realized her father's greatest gift wasn't billions. It was teaching her that wealth without character means nothing. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is actually the most powerful. Never judge someone's worth by their silence.